All right. NFL Pretenders or Contenders? Week 7 edition. All right, we're going to start off with the Chicago Bears. Oh, hang on here. I got to grab my notes. Oops. Dang it. There we go. All right, the Chicago Bears. All right, 5-2 in the NFC North, and the only two losses they've got were the Colts at 4-2 and the Rams at 5-2. Combined records of the teams that they've beaten, 13-21. So the teams they've beaten combined 13 wins. Average points allowed 20. Average points scored 19.7 per game. Okay, so they are allowing more points than they're scoring. That is never a good combination. Okay, the only team that they have beat with a positive record, with an above 500 record, was the Bucs. The only team. Okay, keep that in mind. The average wins of their entire opponents is 3.1. And the average wins for the opponents that they've beaten is down to 2.6. So again, they've only beaten one team. Now, granted, yes, 7 games, but they've only beaten one team with a winning record. And the total wins combined of their entire schedule, or excuse me, of the teams they've beat, is 13-21. Okay? Keep that in mind. So, that being said, I've got the Bears ranked as a pretender. Definitely do not see them making any sort of playoff run. Potentially a playoff berth, but definitely not a playoff run. Next up, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, some of you Brady fans, some of you Buck fans, I get it. Yep, they're a good team. 5-2 in the NFC South. Their 2 losses were to the 4-2 Saints and the 5-2 Bears that we just mentioned. Combined record of teams they've beat, 15 wins, 17 losses. Now, they actually have one of the better, for the top teams in the NFL, they have one of the better records of combined teams that they've beaten. Okay, just keep that in mind. They're one of the closer to 500, so that's a good thing for them. Average points allowed 20.3. Average points scored 31.7. So they're positive 11 points. That is the type of scoring you want to see, and that means they're balanced. They've got a good defense, they're playing well, and they're putting up points. Now, they have struggled a little bit, but seems to be coming together, and with Antonio Brown coming into the mix, I know they had some injuries at wide receiver. Antonio Brown coming in could really help settle that. Now, the one team that they beat, though, with a winning record was the Packers. So they've only beat one team that had a winning record out of all 5 wins. Okay? The average wins per their opponents, 3.4. And their average wins per opponent beaten is 3. So drops just a little bit, but not too bad. So Tampa Bay, they are a contender. I have them as potentially making a playoff run, potentially even NFC champs. But again, don't know what's going to happen, but I've got them listed as a contender. I think that they are going to finish out the rest of the season, and they are going to be a problem for many teams on their schedule. The Buffalo Bills. 5-2 in the AFC East. Their 2 losses were to the Titans at 5-1, and then the 6-1 Chiefs. So those are respectable losses. You can't knock a team for losing to the Chiefs and the Titans. You just can't. They're both playing well. Now, combined record of the teams that they have beat is only 8-22. I will preface that by saying they've played the Jets twice. So, let's face it here. Jets are, yeah. Now, granted, they only barely beat the Jets this last weekend. Anyway, average points allowed, 25.4. Their average points scored, which shocked me, 24.9. They have scored less than their opponents on the season. I was expecting this to be much higher with how Josh Allen started off on the season, but only 24.9 points per game. They are negative 0.5. That is not a good thing. That will not win playoff games. That will not keep them in first place in the division. Now, granted, their division is soft right now. The next team behind them is 3-3, being the Dolphins. So, Buffalo Bills also average wins per opponent 2.7. Okay, so their entire schedule averages 2.7 wins. Their entire 7 games played. Now the 5 wins that they've got, the average wins 1.6. They've beat 5 teams with an average of 1.6 wins. That is not a good look for the Bills. So, are the Bills a contender or a pretender? They are a pretender. They have not played well against the good teams, and they barely beat the Jets this last weekend. So they've got some problems. Now, I do think they could come back from it, but again, based on what's gone on so far, they are a pretender. The Brownies, the Cleveland Browns. We got them at 5-2 in that brutal AFC North. Lost to the 5-1 Ravens and the 6-0 Steelers. Again, that's 2 top-notch teams. How do you fault the Cleveland Browns? It's really simple. Combined records of teams that they've beat, 10, 22, and 3. Why do they have 3? Because they've played the Bengals twice and the Eagles once. The Bengals and the Eagles tied in their matchup. Well, that means that tie goes on their record twice for playing the Bengals twice already. And then the Eagles won. So 10, 22, and 3. Not a good look for them. Average points allowed, 31.6. Their defense is allowing 31 plus points. That's horrible. That ranks them in the bottom 10 in the NFL. Their average points scored, 28.6. They are -3 in scoring. And that is not going to get it done, especially when you've got to come back and play the Ravens and the Steelers one more time yet this year, which the Browns only scored 6 points on the Ravens and 7 points on the Steelers, and both Steelers and Ravens put up 30-plus points on them. This is not going to bode well for Cleveland. Cleveland only beat the Colts with a winning record. The average wins for their opponents overall is 3, and the average wins per opponent's beaten is a full game less, only 2 games per opponent that they beat. So in the 5 wins that they've got, their opponents average 2 wins. Cleveland Browns are pretenders. They will not make a playoff run. Could they make the playoffs? Possibly. Will they win playoff games? Absolutely not. They will not be able to handle playing in the AFC playoffs against teams like the Chiefs, like the Titans, the Steelers, the Ravens. It's just not going to happen. Speaking of the Ravens, Baltimore Ravens, 5-1 in that brutal AFC North. Only loss to the 6-1 Chiefs. And the Chiefs just have their number. They're a tough team. I'm talking about the Ravens. Good defense, good offense. Combined record of the teams they beat, 11, 22, and 2. So the 2 ties, again, Bengals and Eagles. They did beat the Browns with a positive record of 5-2. So that's their one only victory against a team with a positive record. 5-2 Browns. And they crushed them. It was also week 1, but 6, it was like Browns had 6 and the Ravens, I think, had 34 or 33 points. It was just an absolute freaking slugfest, or I should say beat down. Average points allowed, 17.3, puts them in the bottom three in the, or I should say top three in the league for least amount of points allowed. Average points scored, 29.8. They are positive 12 points above their opponents. Now, yes, their opponents have been lackluster, but this is definitely a team that is built to win, and the Ravens actually just signed Des Bryant to their practice squad, so they could end up potentially having Des Bryant catching passes from Lamar Jackson by the end of the season if they ever need to activate him for any reason, and if he ends up doing well for him. So, Baltimore Ravens, Pittsburgh Steelers coming up this weekend. They are a contender. Baltimore Ravens absolutely set up for a deep playoff run. The Nolans Saints. 4-2 in the NFC South. Their two losses to the 3-3 Raiders and the 5-1 Packers. Raiders, that was an interesting game. I don't know if this was necessarily a point of the Raiders being that good or game planning against the Saints or just bad matchups, but the Raiders took it to them. Can't fault them for that. And then 5-1 Packers. Packers were just balled out. Aaron Rodgers was playing really freaking well this year. The one team that they did beat with a winning record this year was the Bucs. They did beat the Bucs early on in the season. Bucs are obviously 5-2. Hey, what's up, Zeus? Combined record of the team they've beat. They are the only team that made it on this list that made it with a 500 or better record. So the New Orleans Saints 4 wins are against teams that are 13-13 total. So they're the only team with a 500 combined record of the teams they beat. Average points allowed, 29. Average points scored, 30. So they're only one in the positive. And again, I'll go back to this. If you can't play defense and you can't stop people, you're probably not going to win the Super Bowl. Odds are, as a lot of Seahawks fans know, when you come into the Super Bowl with the best defense, you can take an offense out of it real quick. Look at what they did to the Broncos. It changes everything. Now, a good offense, a high-powered offense, absolutely can pick people apart. But I'll always give the edge to a good defense. And if you can't stop people, it's going to be tough. So, only having the one plus, the one positive does make this a struggle. I don't really think New Orleans is set up to make a deep playoff run this year. And again, this is not based on Michael Thomas coming back at any point or Emmanuel Sanders coming back at any point. This is based off the teams that fielded the last game. Now, their average wins per opponent, 3.5, and their average wins per opponent they've beaten barely drops, and that only goes down to 3.25. Ooh, dang it. Lost my screen. There we go. I've got them as a pretender. Again, when you're not really beating any good teams and you're allowing a lot of points scored to sub 500 teams, it makes it really tough to make it into the playoffs or make a deep playoff run. Arizona Cardinals. Big win for them Sunday night. And that, I think, could come and play huge come standings at the end of the season. That was a massive win for them, and got to hand it to them. They played their hearts out. 5-2 in the NFC West, actually a half game behind the Seahawks. Lost to the 3-3 Lions and the 3-4 Panthers. Sorry, Seahawks fans. Combined record of the teams they've beat, 13-21. And they did beat 2 teams with a 500 record this year. They're one of the only teams to beat 2 teams with a 500 record so far. And they beat the 49ers already with a 4-3 record, and the Seahawks with a 5-1 record. So again, taking down 2 500 teams definitely is a positive. Average points allowed, just under 21. Average points scored, 29. So they're positive 8 barely. Now, I will preface this by saying I do have them as a pretender, and only because they've got to get past the Seahawks, they've got to get past the 49ers, and I don't know if they're able to handle that twice a year, and they could potentially get bumped out of the playoffs by losing to the Niners, to the to the Rams, and to the Seahawks. This could be brutal for them. So I've got them as a pretender until I can see them not losing those games to those 3-3 teams, and to that they've got to pay their dues. Let's say the Kansas City Chiefs, everybody's hot team to talk about. 6-1 in the AFC West. Their one loss, division rival, the 3-3 Raiders, which the Raiders have picked off a couple of good teams. They're one of the only other teams in the NFL to have multiple victories against winning teams. So pretty impressive by the Raiders. The Raiders, I think, could potentially end up being a sleeper team and sneak into the playoffs at the end if we have a couple other teams that do fall apart towards the end of the season. Now, the Chiefs also did beat the Ravens at 5-1 and the Bills at 5-2. And, taking down two big teams like that, it's got to play in your favor. Combined record of the teams they beat, they have the most wins in the combined of 17-21. They have, in the teams that they've beaten, those records combined equal the most wins. So they are number one in the NFL right now for that stat. Average points allowed, 20.4. Average points scored, 31.1. They are positive 10. That's massive for them. That is huge. That is a difference maker right there. That is going to help them tremendously in the long run. If they can continue playing at that level, they could be on another Super Bowl run. So it just depends on who steps up and decides to want to stop them. Their average wins per opponent, 2.9 wins, and their average opponents beaten, 2.8. So literally 0.1 difference. So they've got a lot of teams that they played. The other four teams that they played all had losing records, but taking down Ravens and taking down Bills, that's big money for them. Chiefs are contenders. The Indianapolis Colts, led by Phillip Rivers, 4-2 in the AFC South, lost to the 1-5 Jaguars. Oh, sorry. They lost to the 1-5 Jaguars. I don't know why I had it listed like that. And then the 5-2 Browns. So that was their two losses this season. The Jaguars loss absolutely killed them. That was when you are the only loss to a one-loss team coming up on midseason, man, that's got to be that's a kick to the guts. That's a kick to the nuts. I mean, they really should be 5-1 right now, other than that Jaguars loss. And then losing to the Browns was, losing to the Browns. Now, they did beat the Bears at 5-2, so they do have a win against a winning team, but it's the only one, and we already said the Bears were pretenders anyways. So, combined record of teams that they beat, they are one of the worst at 7-19-1. They are one of the lowest combined win teams at 7 wins for the 4 teams that they played. Now, granted, again, that's only 4 wins, but that's not looking good. Average points allowed, 19.2. Average points scored, 26.2. And the main reason why I have the Colts listed up here, I don't believe the Colts are a top 15-ish team. Their defense played solid, but they also had a weaker schedule to start with, so 19.2 points per game allowed. To me, I had to put them up here because of that. Their average wins per opponent overall is only 2.2 right now through week 7. That's not very good. So they've had a pretty weak schedule. The average wins per opponents beaten is only 1.8, so it drops down below 2. It's almost embarrassing how bad their schedule is. They're a pretender. Absolutely. 100% hands down. I do not believe in the Indianapolis Colts. I think they have a suspect defense that has taken advantage of bad teams, and that's about what they're riding on. Phillip Rivers is turning the ball over too much, and their lone shining star on offense is Jonathan Taylor, and he's just not getting enough looks. He's averaging like 70 yards per game since he's been starting, which is fantastic on the 10 carries he gets or 12 carries he gets. But they're just not balanced right now, and Phillip Rivers is a turnover machine right now. Who knows? We could see Jacob Eason by the end of the season. Next up, the LA Rams, who we just saw Monday night take down the Bears. LA Rams putting in a 5-2 record in the NFC West. The entire NFC West has a winning record, by the way, with the worst record being the 49ers at 5-3. And they lost to the 5-2 Bills and the 4-3 49ers. So one divisional loss, one cross-conference loss. The Rams did beat the Bears Monday night, last night, who had a 5-2 record. So they have at least beat one team with a winning record. Combined records of the teams that they have beaten. So the combined record of the 5 teams they beat, 12, 21, and 1. So again, they're sitting right around that 250 mark on their schedule. So it's not like they've been blowing the doors off of winning teams. They literally have played some pretty easy games so far. The meat of their schedule is coming up. Average points allowed 17.7 puts them in the bottom 5 of the NFL right now, I believe, or I should say top 5 for least amount of points. Average points scored 25. So they're sitting right around that 7-ish cushion mark, 7 to 8 mark, which their offense does struggle. Their defense has put up some points on the board, which does help their average score. Their average wins for their opponents overall is 3, and their average opponents beaten wins is 2.4. So again, not exactly blowing the doors off of monstrous teams. Waiting to see how they handle some of these other good teams that they have to play against this year. Seahawks being one of them, Cardinals being another. They are pretenders. They are not going to be making a deep playoff run. They are not built to win right now. That defense is fantastic, but that offense is very suspect right now. The Pittsburgh Steelers. 6-0 in the AFC North, the only undefeated team left in football. Have not lost to anybody. So obviously I can't put some of the stats up there. Combined records of the teams that they've beat, 16, 23, and 1. Now I will preface that by saying that they have the most teams beat in their record. So obviously that adds to the amount of wins for them to be combined into. The teams that they've beaten with a winning record are the 5-2 Browns and the 5-1 Titans. So they have beat 2 teams that have a combined 10 wins. So if you take the 16 wins, they beat 2 teams that account for 10 of those wins. So the other 4 teams have a combined 6 wins. So that should give you some perspective. Average points allowed, 19.7. Again, puts them also in the top 10 defenses for points allowed. Average points scored, 30.5. They are plus 10. That's huge. That, again, when you're talking spreads like that, that's big. That's a defensive powerhouse. That's an offensive powerhouse. They can put points up on the board. They can take points away from teams. They're playing good football right now, and that's a brutal AFC North. The big competition is going to come this weekend against the Ravens. So I'll be very curious how this weekend goes and see if they can win. If they can maintain and go 7-0 and take down the Ravens, that's huge. That is huge. That is going to solidify them as potentially the best team in football right now. So hopefully this 6-0 talk doesn't get in their heads and they play football and they look at it, we got to take the Ravens down and go from there. The average wins per opponent, 2.7. So obviously the opponent's beaten is the same. So 2.7. And they are a contender. And again, personal bias aside, they are literally playing good football. They're set up with Ben being back. They're set up to potentially make a deep playoff run. The Tennessee Titans, sitting at 5-1 in the AFC South. Their one loss is the 6-0 Steelers. And Jesus just asked, do you think them missing Devin Bush will affect the D? Yes and no. Spillane filled in fantastic against a very good Tennessee Titan team. And as long as Spillane doesn't end up out from this last week, they should be fine. Spillane, obviously not quite as big of a playmaker as Devin Bush, but he filled in fantastically, and that defense rallied around him. So I think they'll be fine. It just means that next year when Bush comes back, watch out for that defense is going to be even better. Back to the Titans. 5-1 in the AFC South, lost to the 6-0 Steelers. That's their only loss on the season. Combined record for teams they've beat, 10-23. So out of 5 wins, out of 5 teams that they've beaten, combined record of only 10 wins. Average points allowed, 25.5. Average points scored, a whopping 31.3. So they're almost positive 6, which, again, when you start getting above 5, that's pretty good when you're playing good defense and you're throwing the ball, you're running the ball, you're putting points on the board. It's a good combo. The one team that the Titans have beat with a winning record accounts for half of the combined record of the teams that they've beat. They beat the Bills at 5-2. So take away that one game. That's 5 wins left between the other 4 wins. So soft schedule, yeah. Average wins per opponent, 2.7, right where the Steelers were. Average wins per their opponents beaten is only 2. So Tennessee Titans, I've got them as pretenders. And only because I don't believe that they're going to maintain. They're not going to be able to take down good teams. Again, only beat the Bills. So it's the only team with a winning record they've beaten. And you saw how a defense in the first quarter, in the first half, could stop their entire offense. You know, Steelers. If Steelers hadn't changed their game plan, they could have carried that on. Obviously, they second half team, but they got to play 4. Tennessee Titans got to play 4 quarters against the good teams. Seattle Seahawks, 5-1 in the NFC West. Their one loss, 5-2 Cardinals, Sunday night. They've only, actually, excuse me, they are the only team on this list that has not had a win against a team with a winning record. So out of the 15 top teams in the NFL, actually, excuse me, 14 teams in the top of the NFL, they're the only team to not have a win against a winning record team. Okay? Just making sure I'm clearing that up. Combined records of the teams that they've beaten, 9-23. Their 5 wins are compiled to 9 wins by their opponents. Average points allowed, 28.7. Average points scored, massive 33.8. Positive 5. Okay? Now, can they continue scoring points like that? They could. Is Russell going to be able to continue to sling the ball like that all season? Could. Will they? Who knows? They've got massive injuries to their defense right now. Jamal Adams, as I mentioned, and we're basing everything around here that Jamal Adams is not playing. So he's not factored into this. The average wins per opponent for the Seahawks is 2.3 wins on average so far in their schedule. The average wins for the opponents they've beaten is 1.8. So out of the 5 teams they've beaten, they average 1.8 wins. So that is bad. And I had the Seahawks one way, I had to change it. And some of you guys are going to hate me over this. I've got them as pretenders right now. And that's only because of that Cardinals loss. If they had beat the Cardinals on Sunday night, we'd be talking a different game right now. I would have had them as contenders. Now, Jamal Adams comes back. We could be talking a different story. But again, Jamal Adams out, changes that defense. We don't know if he's not necessarily coming back this coming weekend against the 49ers. Could miss an additional week. What happens if his injury lingers? They could lose a couple more big games until that defense starts stopping people again. They're a pretender. And again, as Seahawks fans know, defense wins championships. And right now, that defense can't stop good offenses. Okay? Don't hate me for that. Don't hate me for that. Green Bay Packers, 5-1 in the NFC North, lost to the 5-2 Buccaneers. That's their only loss of the season. Now, they did beat the 4-2 Saints. That's their only win against a winning team this year. Combined records of the team they've beat, 10-22. So out of the 5 wins, the Saints account for 4 of those 10 wins. Okay, so that leaves 4 wins, 4 of their opponents, contributing 6 of those wins. So not exactly and blowing the doors off people here, but they're not taking out any great teams except for the Saints, which the Saints, as I mentioned, I have them listed as a pretender. Average points allowed, 26.5. Average points scored, 32.8. So they're a positive 6, which is what you want to see. North of 5 is a big number for them. Now, the average wins for their opponents overall so far through 6 games is 2.5, and their average wins for the opponents they've beaten is only 2. So 5 opponents they beat with 10 wins. That's only a 2-win average per team. So positive 5, positive 6 on scoring. That's good. I've got them listed as a contender. With Devontae Adams back, with Adam Jones, with that offense clicking, going to be tough to stop the Packers. Their defense is playing just good enough to limit teams. I think that Green Bay Packers are going to be the choice team of the NFC, potentially even landing that number 1 overall. Absolutely, guys. Again, there's going to be a lot of clarity over the next 2-3 weeks of the NFL. This is based, again, week 7, where we're at today, which guys are hurt right now. That's just where we're at. And that is